And he waddled away, waddle waddle. Welcome back, everybody. We left off midway through Matthew 26, so that is where we pick up verse 36. Jesus prays in Gethsemane. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. He then said to them, "Oh, pardon me, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch me." Now, we did a breakdown yesterday on this part of this portion, and it exposed something that was pretty insightful that I've never really considered, but it explained that the even to death portion of Jesus's words here is showing us that he was already starting to feel extreme sorrow to the point where he was sweating blood, which is not mentioned in Matthew, but it is mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, which we'll eventually read. Anyway, so we'll get to see that, but I thought that was very interesting that the interpretation that the AI pointed out was that a lot of people say that Jesus was already starting to feel the weight of what he was having to bear for us, even at this point, even before they began to abuse him and torture him, and then eventually the crucifixion. So I thought that was both interesting and yeah, it just expanded the suffering that I was already aware that he went through for us. But yeah, I never even considered that even at this point he was already starting to feel the weight of our sins. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Okay, verse 39. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it will be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." So this is also interesting because now Jesus made a request that he would not have to go through the crucifixion. So that's really interesting. Let's do a breakdown on that. Explain Matthew 26, 39, ESV. Matthew 26:39 is one of the most poignant moments in the New Testament, capturing the raw humanity and absolute divine submission of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It reads, "And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." To understand the depth of this verse, it helps to break it down into these three primary movements: the posture of humility. The text notes that Jesus fell on his face. In Jewish tradition, standing or kneeling was common for prayer, but prostrating oneself, lying flat on the ground, indicated extreme distress, urgent need, or total reverence. It shows that Jesus, despite being the Son of God, approached the Father with complete humility. The cup of suffering. When Jesus asks for the cup to pass from him, he isn't just talking about the physical pain of crucifixion. In the Old Testament, the cup often symbolized the wrath of God against sin. The struggle, this reflects Jesus' true humanity. He felt a natural human shrinking back from the agony and the spiritual weight of bearing the world's sins. The request, if it be possible, explores whether there is any other way to achieve salvation without this sacrifice. Radical submission, the turning point of the verse and the entire passion narrative, is the word nevertheless, not as I will. Jesus acknowledges his own human desire to avoid suffering. But as you will he immediately subordinates his will to the Father's. This is the ultimate "thy will be done," reversing the disobedience found in the Garden of Eden, where the first man, Adam, chose his own will over God's. The second Adam, Jesus, chooses God's will over his own life. Dang. I'm curious if, so is it held that Jesus only able to survive suffering of the worlds and through supernatural? In Christian theology, the question of how Jesus survived the cup of God's wrath and the weight of the world's sin is usually answered through two lenses: his divine human nature and direct angelic assistance. The angelic intervention. While Matthew 26:39 focuses on the prayer itself, the Gospel of Luke provides a specific detail often used to answer your question. Oh, I didn't know that. Luke 22:43 states, "And there appeared to me an angel from heaven, strengthening him." Oh. Theologians often interpret this strengthening in a few ways: physical preservation. Some argue that the spiritual and emotional weight of bearing sin was so immense that Jesus' physical body was on the verge of death before he even reached the cross, evidenced by him sweating drops of blood. The angel provided the physical stamina necessary to survive the garden so he could fulfill the sacrifice on Calvary. Mental fortification. Others suggest the angel provided comfort or a vision of the joy set before him to help his human will remain steadfast in the face of imminent spiritual abandonment. The hypostatic union, divine and human. Most mainstream Christian traditions, including Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, hold that Jesus survived this ordeal because he was fully God and fully man. The human capacity: as a man, he felt the full measure of pain, fear, and the wrath against sin. He did not use his divine power to numb the experience. If he had, the sacrifice would not be considered truly human. The divine capacity. However, it is held that a mere human could not have endured the infinite weight of the world's sin. Theology suggests that his divine nature sustained his human nature, allowing him to bear a burden that would have utterly destroyed any other person, which is kind of what I took it to mean. So that's, yeah, okay, that's interesting. It's all so interesting. Diverse theological perspectives. Different traditions emphasize different mechanisms for his endurance. There's a Reformed Protestant view, which often emphasizes that Jesus had to drink the cup to the dregs, meaning he had to experience the full, unmitigated withdrawal of the Father's presence. In this view, the supernatural intervention was less about making it easy and more about keeping him alive to finish the task. Latter-day Saint view places a heavy emphasis on Gethsemane specifically, suggesting that the suffering was so great he bled from every pore, and that he was only able to survive through his unique status as the literal Son of God, possessing power over death that others did not. Okay, so then I got another question. So how does that, or how do these views contrast with the notion, or with the fact that when Jesus, or that right before Jesus dies on the cross, he had enough strength to speak his last words. I attend 2819 church, and the pastor talked about this moment a few weeks ago, and he mentioned how right before Jesus dies, he speaks loudly. We're about to read it. We'll probably get there today, so you'll see what I'm talking about. But I'm just curious what the interpretation is here. The contrast between Jesus' agony in Gethsemane and his loud cry on the cross is a point of significant theological and medical discussion. Many find it paradoxical that a man enduring the physical trauma of crucifixion and the spiritual weight of sin could summon such strength at the very end. The nature of the loud cry. In the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, it is noted that Jesus cried out with a loud voice, phon megele, right before he breathed his last. The physical paradox. Medicinally, victims of crucifixion usually died of slow asphyxiation. As they weakened, they lost the ability to push up on their feet to draw a breath, eventually resulting in a quiet, struggling death. The theological interpretation. Because he spoke loudly, many traditions argue this was a supernatural display of authority. It suggests that Jesus did not fade away or succumb to exhaustion, but rather gave up his spirit. As a conscious, sovereign act, he was in control of the moment of his death. Okay, so let's go back. Verse 40, as he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. So let's do explain Matthew 26:41. Matthew 26:41 is a pivotal moment in the Gethsemane narrative where Jesus addresses Peter, and by extension James and John, after finding them asleep while he was in agony. The command, watch and pray. Jesus provides a twofold strategy for spiritual survival. Watching, this translates from the Greek gregorite, meaning to be mentally alert or stay awake. In a physical sense, he wanted them to stay awake with him, but in a spiritual sense, it is a call to be vigilant against moral or spiritual danger. Pray. This is the act of defense. Watching identifies the threat. Prayer accesses the power to resist it. Hold that. The purpose is that you may not enter into temptation, or the purpose, not purposes. Jesus isn't necessarily saying they can avoid being tempted, as even he was tempted, but rather that they might not enter into it, meaning to succumb or be overwhelmed by it. He knew that the coming hours, his arrest and trial, would severely test their loyalty. The reality, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. This is one of the most famous psychological and spiritual insights in the Bible. It describes the internal conflict of the believer, the willing spirit. The disciples truly loved Jesus and sincerely intended to stay loyal. Earlier that night, Peter claimed he would die for Jesus. Their spirit or inner intention was aligned with God. The weak flesh. Flesh here refers to the human nature in its frailty, not just physical tiredness, but the natural human instinct towards self-preservation, comfort, and fear. The key takeaway, good intentions, a willing spirit are not enough to overcome trial, because human nature is inherently fragile. Constant vigilance and divine help, watching and praying, are required to stay the course. Okay. Verse 43. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So, leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Man. Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled, just like he said they would. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. And Peter was following him at a distance, and as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priest and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent, and the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you mean." And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Man. Matthew 27. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, What is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, You have said so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. So Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor, presiding over this, because ultimately it was his decision, the Jewish crowd was pressing him to put Jesus to death. They're at this feast where it's tradition, the governor will release one of the prisoners to the crowd, whoever they decide. And then he gets a note from his wife, the governor does, saying, Have nothing to do with that righteous man, talking about Jesus, because she suffered much because of him today in a dream. So she had a dream about him that obviously stirred her heart so much to send a note saying he's innocent, basically. Now the chief priest and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, Which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said, Let him be crucified. And he said, Why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, Let him be crucified. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And all the people answered, His blood be on us and on our children. Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. So being scourged, it's like this, it's like a metal, or not a metal, imagine a stick with the whip on it, and it has like a bunch of bones and bits of metal at the end of a whip, and it's just designed to, when you whip somebody, it just rips your flesh, basically. It's a really torturous really torturous tool used back then. I want to ask about, man, I want to ask about, where did it say? Oh, verse 25. In Matthew, or what are the implications of Matthew 27:25 on the Jews? Matthew 27:25 is one of the most complex and sensitive passages in the New Testament. It reads, "And all the people answered, 'His blood be on us and on our results.'" That's not what it says. What does it say? "His blood be on us and on our children." The implications of this verse have evolved significantly over 2 millennia, shifting from a specific narrative moment in the text to a tool for historical systemic prejudice, and finally to a subject of modern reconciliation. The contextual and narrative interpretation. In the immediate context of the Gospel of Matthew, the verse serves a specific literary and theological purpose. Legal responsibility. It functions as a formal acceptance of responsibility within the trial narrative. This contrasts with Pontius Pilate's symbolic act of washing his hands to declare his own innocence. The all the people group. Biblical scholars often point out that all the people, Pascholaus, likely refers to the specific crowd gathered before Pilate's, praetorium in Jerusalem, rather than a biological or chronological indictment of all Jewish people throughout history. Oh, okay. Perhaps. Prophetic irony. Some theologians argue Matthew includes this as a form of ironic blessing. While the crowd intended it as a self-curse, Christian theology often views the blood of Christ as a source of purification and forgiveness rather than strictly judgment. Historical implications, the blood guilt charge. Historically, this verse has had devastating consequences for Jewish-Christian relations. For centuries, it was used to justify the deicide charge, the accusation that the Jewish people were collectively responsible for the death of God. Yeah, I mean, I understand the intention there, and I can also understand, I mean, even personally, like I think anybody that has a relationship with Christ, when you read through the gospel, it's really easy to read about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and just how wicked they were and really want to hate these people. At least I experienced that. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing to remember is that this was all God's plan, so it's this deicide thing it's easy to fall into, and I get it, but we shouldn't hold that. Okay, anyway, systemic anti-Semitism. This interpretation was used to fuel pogroms, discriminatory laws, and social exclusion in medieval and early modern Europe. The eternal curse myth. Some historical commentators incorrectly interpreted the verse to mean that Jewish suffering throughout history was a direct result of this self-imposed curse. Yeah, that is also kind of crazy to think that it's not like the whole of the Jewish nation was there in that moment. It was just a crowd of Jews that said it. So to assign that to all Jewish people is, nonsense. Modern theological shifts and rejection. In the 20th century, particularly following the Holocaust, most major Christian denominations moved to explicitly reject the collective guilt interpretation of Matthew 27:25. Nostra Aetate, 1965. The Catholic Church issued this landmark document during Vatican II, I don't know, stating that the events of Christ's passion cannot be charged against all Jews without distinction, then alive, nor against the Jews of today. Protestant scholarship. Most modern Protestant scholars emphasize that the blood of Jesus is theologically intended to cover the sins of all humanity, making the guilt universal rather than ethnic. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so we just hit the 30-minute mark, and this is all pretty dense because we're getting right into the point of the crucifixion. So I think we'll stop there, and we'll highlight this spot for tomorrow. So thank you guys for tuning in. God bless you guys. Have a good night, and I will see you guys tomorrow.